Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This Sunday, a former governor comes under scrutiny in a Department of Human Services lawsuit. How is Phil Bryant linked to Mississippi's $94 million TANF scandal? One journalist working on just that question, Anna Wolfe from MississippiToday.org, talks about the latest developments in this evolving case. That and more coming up now on Mississippi Insight. Attorneys for Mississippi's Department of Human Services appeared to open a new chapter last week in the state's $94 million TANF scandal. They issued a subpoena to the University of Southern Mississippi Athletic Foundation for any and all communications between that foundation and Phil and Deborah Bryant, the former governor, and his wife. I spoke Thursday with the journalist who broke this story and who has been tracking the sprawling fraud case for more than 2 years now. Anna Wolfe is the investigative reporter behind MississippiToday.org series, The Back Channel. We talked about before about how big the scandal is. You report the state auditor's office has officially questioned $94 million in spending with federal TANF funds, but these latest developments regarding the former governor involve just part of that spending. Recap your report on the subpoena to the Athletic Foundation and the legal context for it. Sure.
So it's been over 2 years now since people were first arrested in this welfare scandal. And I think in the last 2 years, one of the biggest questions has been, what is Phil Bryant's role in the misspending of these welfare dollars? So, and back 2 years ago, I reported that we actually spent $5 million in welfare money on a volleyball stadium at University of Southern Mississippi. It was through Nancy New's nonprofit. She's a key defendant in the case. And so on Monday, the attorney who is suing several individuals on behalf of the welfare department subpoenaed communication between the Athletic Foundation and a number of people to kind of try to get to the bottom of how did that $5 million get from the Department of Human Services to the university to build a volleyball stadium. And Governor Phil Bryant, former Governor Phil Bryant, and Deborah Bryant were on the list.
Kind of talk about how could Nancy New and her nonprofit justify spending $5 million in block grant funding for that volleyball stadium?
Right, so this payment was really done in the view of many state officials and with support from the IHL, the Attorney General's office. The way that they were able to do it is by suggesting that building a new facility would give the nonprofit office space and sort of classroom space to provide services to needy families on the campus of Southern Miss. So a pretty kind of preposterous idea, but they were able to write that into a lease agreement. And so essentially the $5 million was a lease payment on facilities at USM.
So did the foundation ever receive that TANF money?
So the Athletic Foundation received the TANF money, $5 million, and used it to build the volleyball stadium.
You write about how this subpoena also asked for any communication between the foundation board members or staff and the following defendants: Nancy New, her son Zach New, Jess New, former DHS director John Davis, retired wrestler Ted DiBiase Jr., and former pro quarterback Brett Favre. Briefly, what roles did these other men play in this scandal?
So Brett Favre plays the biggest role in getting that payment. He really was touting the volleyball stadium. He was the one that wanted it to be built. And so he went to Nancy New, and even in messages that I uncovered a few months ago, was suggesting that Nancy New gave him $5 million to build the volleyball stadium. So even in their communication, you can see where the money was going to that purpose because of Brett Favre's influence. John Davis, of course, was the director at the time, so he had to have been involved, in some form or fashion. And Nancy New was running the nonprofit that the money flowed through.
And Ted DiBiase's role?
So Ted DiBiase was sort of John Davis's right-hand man, so he would have been around at the time in the room when conversations were happening about this payment.
And the sons, Jack and Jess?
Zach and Jess, yes. Those are Nancy New's sons, and they were involved in running the nonprofit and their finances.
Yeah. And so Zach is charged criminally, but Jess is not.
That's correct.
I understand. The news allegations mark the first time that Mr. Bryant has been publicly accused of wrongdoing by the primary defendants in this case. We should be clear that this is not charged with any, they're not charged with any crime, and is not a defendant in the human services lawsuit. You interviewed the former governor at length in your investigation. What has he said to you about all of this?
Right, so sort of the biggest revelation about the former governor's involvement in this whole TANF scandal was text messages that I uncovered a few months ago, where he's discussing with the owner of this company that actually received $2 million in stolen welfare money from Nancy. It was a concussion research firm. They were developing a drug to prevent concussions, and Brett Favre was heavily involved in this company and trying to get investments from Mississippi to this company. And in messages, we see that Phil Bryant was discussing this with the company and Brett Favre, and that he was told that they were receiving public funds, and he even agreed to accept stock in the company after he left office. So that was a few months ago. Now Nancy knew after that story came out, she pled guilty, and she got a plea deal, pretty favorable deal that suggests that she might have information that prosecutors find valuable. Typically we see that when they're going after a bigger fish, right? And so now we're seeing, a few months later, real allegations on paper from Nancy New suggesting that Phil Bryant directed her to make payments and was involved as part of the system that perpetuated this scheme. And specifically, she says that she was directed to make payments directly to Brett Favre in the amount of $1.1 million. She was directed to do that by former Governor Phil Bryant.
Is there any...
This is an allegation.
Right.
So he denies this.
Right.
And in communication that we've had, he just kind of tells a story, he kind of crafts the narrative that he was asleep at the wheel, that he didn't really realize what was going on.
That he really didn't pay attention to his text, that he wasn't really paying attention to the details of the text.
Wasn't paying attention to the text, was just shooting off sort of canned responses to people, and really didn't seem to know that, where these different funding streams were coming from.
There weren't any specific text messages that directly said, do this and take the money from here or anything, right?
The texts in some cases are explicit, in some cases they're not. So in the case of, there's no text from Phil Bryant, at least to Brett Favre, that says, go get TANF money, nothing like that.
But there's implications or
there's
implied.
Strong implications.
After the break, we'll look at the impact this scandal has had on Mississippi's poorest families. And Governor Tate Reeves rejects a bottom of the nation ranking for Mississippi's workforce. We're back in a moment. As part of your reporting on this scandal, you and your colleagues at Mississippi Today developed an infographic that shows the true impact of this fraud. Let's take a look at that. At the top of that graphic, $5 billion used for the USM volleyball stadium could have paid instead for a year's worth of child care costs for 920 families. $3+ million that went to Ted DiBiase Jr. for motivational self-help training could have paid an average monthly electric bill for almost 23,000 families. And Brett Favre's $1.1 million in payments for speeches and appearances, well, he could have bought a year's worth of diapers for more than 1,100 mothers with that money. And if the entire $94 million bundled was put toward cash assistance for needy families, more than 138,000 might have benefited, according to your analysis. As a journalist, why was it important for your team to visualize how that money could have been used?
Yeah, I really wanted people to know, what the program really could have done for families, and specifically, those are big numbers. Mm-hmm. This is a lot of people. We've got a huge percentage of people in our state living in poverty who could have benefited from these dollars, and I wanted people to see and be able to visualize just how many people that is, and just how crucial the supports are that we could have provided, like childcare, food assistance, and others.
What kind of reaction have you gotten since this has all been coming out from the articles and the investigations that you've done?
I mean, people are outraged that this money in the poorest state in the country could have gone to, professional wrestlers and people who already have so much money, enriching the families and friends of welfare officials who should have been looking out for, poor people in Mississippi and acting in their best interest.
We barely scratched the surface of the state and federal criminal investigations on this scandal. What's the status right now, where we are?
So 6 people were arrested in 2020. There haven't been charges against anyone else related to the scheme in the last 2 years. There are 2 people who haven't pled guilty yet, so their cases are pending. The others 4 of whom who have pled guilty, they're expected to cooperate with the ongoing investigation, which we're still waiting to see what that entails. But I think we can expect that that investigators are at least looking to see who else might be responsible for this scheme. And then separately, the state is suing more than 24 people to kind of try to claw back that money that they say was misspent. So there's a difference between stealing and misspending, right? And the civil suit is going to address the misspending. So any purchases that they say, violated federal regulations for welfare dollars. What's interesting about that is that, federal welfare funds under this program, TANF, they're very flexible. I mean, the feds give states a lot of discretion on how to spend this money. And for the last 26 years in the program's existence, Mississippi has taken full advantage of that flexibility. So, this isn't just something that started with Nancy New and John Davis. This is a long-standing history of using the money in ways that, not using it directly on people in poverty, but using it on classes and, after-school programs and that kind of thing. So the News are arguing that the state has always used this money in kind of ways that people might not expect, and only now, since the kind of absurdity of the way that they were running the program is now in public view, is the state kind of revising its interpretation of TANF to apply only narrowly to programs that help people in poverty. So it'll be interesting how it plays out.
How worried should the former Governor Bryant be about the allegations?
I think that the text messages are pretty incriminating. I don't know if it's enough to, get an indictment. That's not for me to say. But I think that the public really wants to know that investigators are fully exploring his involvement. And I think they're going to demand that they see that happened before this is all over.
Given how much there is to talk about in the scandal, what's your tip for people for getting up to speed on this investigation?
Well, Mississippi Today's coverage. We are labeling a lot of the coverage of this part of the scandal as the Back Channel. That's the name of the series that we publish in April. It is a lot to cover, I totally understand, but maybe taking the approach of looking at how the governor was involved might be interesting to readers.
When people are reading this, and what do you want them to take away, and what do you want them to learn about how the government and how the state was handling this welfare money?
I think it's just a huge illustration of the state's sort of regard for people living in poverty. I don't think that you would have seen this kind of brazen misspending in other types of programs. It was because this money was reserved for people in poverty that it was subject to such corruption and a target for that kind of corruption. So I just, we are the poorest state in the country, and that is not a coincidence. It's a choice that we've made as a state and our leaders have made.
Anna Wolfe, thank you for your reporting and for keeping us up to date on what's going on.
Appreciate
you joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back. Governor Tate Reeves is rejecting a news network's findings about Mississippi's workforce. The business channel, CNBC, ranks Mississippi as America's worst state for business. This claim stemmed from CNBC's Business Competitive Survey of all 50 states. That survey finds, even though our cost of living is the lowest in the nation, workers are not moving to the state. And the workforce that's left is among the least educated and least productive workers in the nation. Well, CNBC does applaud Mississippi for our workforce development agency, Accelerate Mississippi. But even that has yet to produce enough highly skilled workers to meet demand. Governor Tate Reeves reacted to the report Thursday. We caught up with him at a workforce development event at Pearl River Community College.
Bringing great news to South Mississippi today with a $1.7 million investment in Pearl River Community College for the purpose of workforce development and workforce training. And the most important thing about today's announcement is these dollars, working with the team here at Pearl River Community College, are going to go into areas of need here in the Pine Belt, but also areas of need in this country. We talked a lot about today about healthcare workers, nursing, logistics, truck drivers. Those are the kind of jobs that we're training for here, because those are jobs that can pay above average wages, but they also provide great opportunities. And we also know that there's need, and there's also need not just now, but need for the next 10, 20, 30 years in each of these fields.
I noticed on one of the posters that had a $1 million investment, hopefully will yield $38 million in results. Talk a bit about that.
Well, there's no doubt. We're going to train. We're not using these monies to build buildings. We're actually using these monies to train Mississippians. And so a small investment in increasing the size of the class is going to turn out literally hundreds and hundreds of people with better paying jobs that they then can use to provide for themselves and their families. And so really this is just a partnership that makes a lot of sense for Mississippians. In the old days, we used to have a lot of people out looking for jobs. Nowadays, we have a lot of jobs out looking for people. And that's why we're using these monies to train the workforce that is needed to be able to deliver the products across the world.
Governor, people are coming to Mississippi to be trained, but they're not staying. What are we doing to retain? Is this a push towards retaining workers here in Mississippi?
Well, we certainly want to retain more and more Mississippians. You know, one of the interesting things, and this is often the case where Mississippi is underrated and Mississippi is falsely accused of things. You know, you look at the census in 2020, and they initially said that Mississippi actually lost population. Well, then there was lots and lots of stories about that, but then they go back and they recalculate, and we actually saw a 4% gain in population over a 10-year period, which 4% is not a huge number unless you consider that's 120,000 additional people living in Mississippi. And so, but we still got to work to continue to improve things. The way in which we do that is to make sure that we have good, high-paying jobs for our people. And programs like we announced today are going to help provide that.
And just lastly, second least educated, least productive workforce, and least worker migration. Talk about the future of what you plan to do about these type of ratings.
Well, I'm not sure where those ratings came from, but what I would tell you is that 10 years ago, Mississippi's K-12 educational system was ranked 50th in the nation. We went about the hard work of investing in public education, but we also went about the hard work of being willing to make reforms as well. And what we've seen has been remarkable. Last year, if you look at our NAEP testing results in Mississippi, 4th grade reading, 4th grade math, 8th grade reading, and 8th grade math, our 10-year growth numbers are #1 in the nation. Our overall educational system is actually ranked anywhere between 32nd and 35th in America. Now, 32nd and 35th isn't good enough. We want to keep seeing improvements, and we're going to keep doing everything we can to do that. But to anyone out there or any entity out there that says our educational system is 48th or 49th or 50th, people can say that now, but they're lying. It's just simply not true. But when I was elected governor, my very first State of the State, what I said is we've got challenges, and I wasn't elected to try to hide our challenges. I was elected to try to fix our challenges, and days like today, programs like we announced today, are going towards helping fix those challenges.
That's Governor Reeves speaking Thursday. CNBC also cited Mississippi's court system. They labeled it, quote, notoriously hostile to business. And they note several laws that they call discriminatory, including the law barring transgender girls from competing in school sports. We'll be back in a moment. We want to hear from you at Mississippi Insight and 12 News. Just email the producers at this address, news@WJTV.com. Send us your comments, your questions, your segment ideas. That's news@WJTV.com. Big thanks to Mississippi Today's Anna Wolfe for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.